presentation of colors that are presented by Allendale Fire Department, followed by Allendale Police, Ambulance Corps, and CERT. Good evening, everybody. I'm Mayor Amy Wilczynski, and it is an honor for me to serve as your Master of Ceremonies this evening. I'd like to invite up Pastor Dave Meyer to give the invocation from Highlands Presbyterian Church.
22 years ago, families gathered around tables, people went to their churches, they were in their offices, and they gathered in prayer for the events, the people of that day, for what they were feeling. So it is proper and fitting that tonight we begin with prayer. Join with me. We remember, God of history and remembrance. We remember when the towers fell and lives were lost. We remember the dust and smoke, the despair and the grief. We remember that sense of vulnerability and shock. We remember the numbness that overwhelmed us as we watched our screens for hours and hours, waiting for an explanation, an understanding that never came. We remember, God of hope and presence. We remember the heroes, those who rushed to help, who guided the wounded down innumerable flights of stairs, who rose to overwhelm those who held death in their hands. We remember the hours and the days of binding wounds and healing hurts, giving comfort, drying tears. We remember words of support and compassion from nations far and wide. We see the ripples of that tragic day continue to impact our world now, 22 years later. We grieve with our allies as our allies grieved with us 20 years ago, and together we wonder if there will ever be an end to violence and to war, to hatred and to death. We grieve our world's inability to learn the things that make for peace. We call to you now in our remembrance, God of justice and peace. On this day of solemn remembrance, may we honor the lives that were lost in that tragic act. May we give thanks for those who served and saved, rendered aid and assistance. May we give comfort to those whose lives who live with loss. May we seek justice and peace where it is within our ability, and rely on you when the ability escapes us. On this day of solemn remembrance, may we build what has been torn down. May we mend what has been broken. May we live your love when hate seems to reign. May we bear witness to the cause of your peace. Amen. Amen.
Please remain standing. Gentlemen, remove your hats, and all place your right hand over your heart in honor of all of those in the military who serve, who have served, and in memory of those lost on 9/11 as we sing our national anthem. I would like to call up Allendale resident Sherry Marino to lead us in song. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, was that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the I would like to now invite Councilwoman Lobosolo up to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Mayor. With respect for our nation, I now ask you to join me in reciting our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Allendale's 9/11 Candlelight Memorial Ceremony. Thanks all for coming today as a community to remember that fateful day, which was 22 years ago. I'm grateful that we're all here in lovely Crestwood Lake, even in the rain. It's a little cozy in here, and it's always such an honor for me to be the MC of this very important ceremony. Here in Allendale, we hold this ceremony the same day, 9/11, same time, rain or shine, and it's still unbelievable to me that so many come out for this. I know I may be biased, but I have been told, and I still believe, that this is one of the most beautiful ceremonies out of anywhere in New Jersey, or probably the United States. It's respectful for all the 9/11 survivors and the loved ones and those who didn't make it. This ceremony started with Mayor Emeritus Vince Barra, who drilled in the importance of this day, and continued with Mayor Emeritus White, who are both here tonight. We continue to instill the dignity and importance of this ceremony year after year, and our current council feels the exact same way, and they are all here tonight. Council President Homan, Councilwoman Lobosolo, Councilman O'Toole, Delavisio, O'Connell, and Yacarino. I would also like to thank Councilman, say your name right, Azaridi from Saddle River, who's joining us tonight as a guest. So we're going to keep this going as long as we can, and then we'll pass it over. As leaders in the community, it's our job to make sure we never forget, to keep the memories and honor the sacrifices of our patriots. It was a promise made to our residents when the memorial was created, especially when they told us that people forgetting was their biggest fear. While 9/11 changed history and the world as we knew it, I think equally important is the day after, on September 12th. We had amazing acts of bravery, heroism, resilience, and grit. We came together as a nation, we became stronger, and we healed together. This is what we need to remember, embracing what is important and rejecting hatred, staying true to our values, appreciating freedom, and working together so something like this doesn't happen again. This, and knowing that America is the best nation, is how we can honor those who have been lost. Currently, I was going to ask if anybody knew this number. According to ChatGPT anyway, 14% of our population was not even born yet before 9/11. I've heard different numbers, but The latest 14%. This is an ever-growing number. And this doesn't even include the kids who were too young to remember. So today I had the lucky opportunity to speak to Mr. Goodman's and Mrs. Stein's 7th and 8th grade social studies class. He started bringing them up here, I think about 2 years ago. And by coincidence, I happened to be up here setting up for one of our ceremonies. And he asked me if I would say a couple of words to his class. And he said the kids were just so enthralled in our beautiful area that he actually made it part of his curriculum. So he brings them up every day. So we're doing it today and we're actually doing it tomorrow. And I talked to them about how important it was to never forget. And I asked them if they all had any stories that their parents shared with them. And they actually all told me that their parents were in college at the time. Okay. So then, next we always look at this steel artifact, because how can you miss it? The artifact is an I-beam from one of the towers, and I always like to point out that twisted rebar that's hanging there like a loose piece of rope. And then we go around and we read the timeline that's etched in marble around the steel, which we're also going to be reading to you this evening. Then I point out the other features of our memorial, which I would like to point out to you all tonight. The pavers around the eagle statue are in the shape of a pentagon to represent the U.S. Pentagon in Washington, D.C. The water towers, which are actually not up now because of some debris in the pond, but they are to represent Tower 1 and Tower 2 of the World Trade Center. In the back over here, the trees down this path lead to a circle of trees that represent the field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The design, including the eagle statue with Mike Bertoli, which I did see here today, engraved, with he actually made the statue, but there's engravings that say, "Time changes the heart, but the heart never forgets the memories within," were all designed by Allendale residents in a contest to get the community involved. Once we received the steel in 2013, we incorporated it into the design of our memorial. The steel is angled at 9 degrees 11 minutes and it's facing downtown. And of course, the timeline of events etched in that day in the marble around the steel, which is so powerful even all these years later. So I'm really grateful for Mr. Goodman, who's a veteran himself, that he does this every year so these kids can have an experiential history lesson. And hopefully now they will never forget. And I'm really happy that Allendale is doing its part as well. So next is our speaker. We actually started the speaker series program about 10 years ago. And we started featuring a speaker every year for people to have the opportunity to tell their story when they're ready. Everyone has a story, an experience on 9/11, and that aftermath on that fateful day. They're all profound stories, and they're all special. We've had council people tell their story, one of our own council people, one of our own firefighters, our first responders. We had a photographer from the Daily News come, and we had a leading forensic dentist that was on the site. Tonight is no different. Our speaker this evening is Frank DeMola. He comes to our ceremony every year, and he always approaches me at the end of this ceremony, and he always says how beautiful it is. And last year, he came and he said he's ready to tell his story. So Frank is a 27-year Allendale resident along with his wife, Elaine. They raised 3 children here. He's retired from the Port Authority, and he's the director for corporate real estate after 35 years and is currently the executive director for Terminal 4 Airlines Consortium at JFK Airport. He was also a police officer and is a U.S. Air Force veteran. Frank will talk about his experience on September 11, 2001, while on the 65th floor of One World Trade Center, where he was Port Authority's Assistant Director for Aviation for Operations. He will speak to the selfless courage of others that he witnessed rescuing employees trapped in an elevator on the 73rd floor. Frank lost 87 of his Port Authority colleagues that day, 37 who were police officers. So without further ado, Frank.
Good evening, and thank you, Mayor Linsky and Allendale council members for this opportunity to share a story about my September 11, 2001 experience. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce my family members here tonight. I have a lovely wife of 43 years, Elaine. My children, we have Jessica, we have Corinne, and we have Gregory. My children, adult children, so. My sisters, Cecilia and Janine, brother-in-law Barry, brother-in-law Tom, niece Lisa, and Kelly. I should also mention that my brother-in-law Barry is a retired police sergeant. He was also in the World Trade Center that day and saved lives. So, thank you, Barry. Let me start here. 22 years ago, America confronted one of its darkest moments. The two largest towers in New York were destroyed. Black smoke poured out from the Pentagon. Airplane wreckage smoldered on a remote Pennsylvania field. In the course of 1 hour and 42 minutes, nearly 3,000 innocent people going about their normal daily routines, including office workers, airline workers, firefighters, law enforcement personnel, lost their lives in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. The very next day, on September 12th, we awoke to a much different world with fear and uncertainty clouding our future. My story is not about me, but it's about the selfless courage that I witnessed on that day. Ordinary people exhibiting extraordinary courage and faith to help one another through this terrible terrorist attack. We remember the rescue workers who rushed to the scene, the police and firefighters who charged up the stairs, the flight crews who fought bravely to save their passengers, and the passengers who stormed the cockpit. Our military men and women in uniform fighting to protect our nations, these are the patriots who exemplify the very meaning of selfless courage. My story begins on a crisp, clear Tuesday morning on September 11, 2001. At that time, I was the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey's Assistant Director of Aviation. And my office was located in the aviation headquarters on the 65th floor of One World Trade Center. My commute that morning from my home in Allendale was uneventful. A commuter train ride to Hoboken, and connecting the path then onto the World Trade Center. Up the enormous bank of escalators to the World Trade Center Mall, turning right, heading toward the One World Trade Center lobby. My usual stop was at a coffee kiosk located just outside the large revolving glass doors, leading to the lobby of One World Trade. A short walk to one of the massive express elevators that took me nonstop to the 44th floor sky lobby. Arriving in my office, and at that point I transferred to a bank of local elevators to my 65th floor. And I arrived at my office at 8:15. The view from my office with floor-to-ceiling windows was spectacular. A beautiful view of the Statue of Liberty in the New York Harbor to my right, to my left, to World Trade Center, where I can easily see office workers in the adjoining building also coming to work. It was at 8:46 when I felt the building shake so violently. A strong vibration, a low rumbling sound that actually felt the building sway. And the World Trade Center was designed this way. It was like hurricane force winds. But this swaying was very different. I knew immediately that an explosion of some sort just occurred. Not sure what caused it or where it occurred, until I looked out my office windows and saw a massive amount of paper raining down, much like confetti you would see in a parade. I knew at that moment the building was hit, and not only hit but punctured, and I knew it was an explosion on the upper floors that was caused by an aircraft that I presumed a corporate jet. I also noticed people across the lane at 2 World Trade Center pressed up against their windows looking up. I stepped outside my office and everyone on the floor was standing in total silence, no one moved. It was a wisp of whitish smoke spreading fast across the ceiling tiles. Staff started speaking nervously to one another and someone shouted for everyone to immediately walk to the stairwells and do not take the elevators. I walked around the floor to be sure that everyone was leaving, and one woman sat frozen at her desk. She would not move or respond to me in any way at all. I asked 2 staff members to physically help her stand up and walk her to the stairwell. I found out later the reason why she felt paralysis because her office faced the north side of the World Trade Center, looking uptown toward the Empire State Building. She actually caught a glimpse of the aircraft flying at a very low altitude toward the World Trade Center and saw the aircraft go up into the building. So on the other side of it, she was frozen. During that little trip around the floor, it was now evident that the wisp of white smoke along the ceiling was quickly turning dark gray, thick, and spreading to the floor, decreasing visibility. While walking to the stairwell, I also noticed that the carpeting in the hallway corridor was saturated wet, with a distinct odor that I recognized from my days in operations at Newark Airport. It took me only a moment to realize the wet was jet fuel, and it was totally inconceivable that jet fuel would be present on the 65th floor of the World Trade Center. But there it was, Jet fuel was pouring down the elevator shafts from where American Airlines Flight 11 tore through the building between the 93rd and 99th floor. A little known fact is that the World Trade Center was designed in the early 1960s to withstand a direct impact of the Boeing 707, which was the largest commercial aircraft in service at that time. In the early 1960s, terrorism was not in the Port Authority's vocabulary, but the precaution taken during the design of the World Trade Center to withstand the Twin Towers, to withstand a direct hit by an aircraft, was presumably to address what occurred on July 28, 1945, when a B-25 Mitchell bomber lost its way in fog and crashed into the north side of the Empire State Building. The American Airlines Flight 11 aircraft that crashed into One World Trade was a modern-day Boeing 767, which is substantially heavier in terms of weight with a greater fuel capacity than the 1960 Boeing 707. The stairwell was congested with office workers descending, and it was amazing that no one was pushing or shoving. There was clearly a heightened sense of anxiety and nervousness, and at one point a group of office workers yelled, "Give way," while they rushed a woman who was burned beyond recognition down the stairs. And I later learned that I knew this woman, who was a Port Authority staff assistant assigned to the 88th floor, just below the point of impact. She was doused in jet fuel, caught fire, and her burns made her unrecognizable to me. While walking down 4 or 5 flights of stairs, someone mentioned that there were Port Authority engineers trapped in an elevator on the 73rd floor. I, along with an aviation colleague of mine, reversed course and headed counterflow up the stairs. Stepping out into the stairwell on the 73rd floor, the air was heavy and thick with smoke and visibility down to 1 to 2 feet. The smell was nauseating and our eyes were tearing. The only way to breathe would be by wrapping your jacket around your face and mouth. I called out and followed the voices to an elevator bank, where I found 2 of our engineering staff, one of whom was the deputy chief engineer, trying to free 2 of his staff from an elevator. The doors of the elevator were propped open about 3 inches, held open with a desk hole punch, and the floor of the elevator was raised about a foot off the corridor floor, which was fortunate because it exposed the elevator door cable located above the door within the elevator. Jack, one of the engineers on the outside, kept reminding his 2 colleagues trapped in the elevator not to worry and promised that none of us are leaving. There it was, we were committed. We took apart office partitions, used stanchions, and anything that resembled a metal pole to try to find as a lever to try to pry open the elevator doors, but the doors would not budge. One of the engineers trapped in the elevator reminded us this was the engineering floor, and there were tools about. And if we could find a cutting tool, he could try to cut the cable wire that was now exposed at the top of the elevator door frame from inside the cab. Maybe it'll do the trick. And a wire cutter was found and passed through the partially open elevator door, where Rob was able to successfully cut the cable strands one at a time, and the doors popped open. There were hugs and tears of joy. We headed for the elevator. Sorry, we headed for the stairwell. The strangest thing about that is that when we asked each other who found the wire cutter, none of us working to free these men admitted to finding it. And to this day, it remains a mystery. I cannot explain that. Heading down the stairwell, we gave way to the many firefighters who were climbing up the stairs, loaded with their heavy bunker coats, battery packs, hoses, and other rescue equipment. They were sweating. I can tell you that their young faces, they were sweating profusely, breathing heavily, and I saw nervousness and fear in their faces as they were ascending to fight a hellish fire and rescue trapped office workers who anxiously awaited them. One of the engineers who was descending the stairwell with me was a structural engineer, and he pointed out to me a visible crack in the wall, floor to ceiling, and told me that that same floor to ceiling crack appeared in the same place on each of the floors as we were descending. I asked him if he was suggesting the building was compromised to the point where the building would collapse. He was certain the building had structural integrity issues, but stopped short of saying it would collapse. And he said it would be a long time before we'll be able to return to our office. It's a good time to point out that to my awareness, no one evacuating or rescuing, including the engineers, thought the building would collapse, and thank God for that. Because the possibility of a collapse, if known, would have had just a disastrous impact on the mindset of every office worker evacuating. including first responders. It was around that time when someone yelled in a stairwell that another plane hit 2 World Trade Center, and that would be United Airlines Flight 175. I remember thinking to myself, people are becoming unhinged and making up stories about another plane crash. I will point out that those of us who are office workers in the building had little to no outside communication. We could not see what the rest of the world was witnessing. We reached the 44th Sky Lobby where a contracted security guard stood directing people to one of the 3 stairwells. There was no one else coming down behind us at this point. I told the guard that no one else was coming down and he should come with us. The demeanor of this guard was very strange. He was very calm and politely but directly told us to use a specific stairwell to continue descending. He clearly had no intention of joining us and repeated that we had better move on. I should mention at this point the plane's impact caused many stairwell doors to slightly twist and jam. In some stairwells, debris from plasterboard blocked passage. This guard was directing evacuees to the one stairwell that had unobstructed passageway. I am certain this guard sacrificed his life that day to save others. I would like to think he was an angel. If he was not, he certainly behaved like that. I made it down to the 30th floor when I saw Port Authority Police Chief Jim Romito and Captain Kathy Mazza, along with a contingent of other Port Authority police officers who were walking up floor by floor to be sure the office work was evacuated. Jim Romito was my police sergeant when I was a young police officer early in my career with the Port Authority, and we remained good friends when I transitioned from police to civilian ranks. I offered my services to assist with 30 floors, and Jim accepted and up we went. I remember that on one floor I found 3 individuals in a small law office feverishly working the fax machine, and I told them to leave immediately. The elder of the 3 individuals approached me and tried to strike up a conversation, clearly trying to give his colleagues more time to finish doing what they were doing. I walked away, found a police officer who simply walked into the law office, passed the 3 individuals without conversation, unplugged the fax machine, and seconds later, all 3 of them marched out. Incredible to think that there were people in the towers on the lower floors who did not really appreciate the seriousness of the situation. It was around the 33rd floor when the building shook violently for a second time, this time much more severely, as if it was an earthquake. Plumes of smoke and debris poured out of the stairwell and onto the corridor floor. Chief Romito was on his handheld radio. There was a lot of yelling and shouting coming from that radio, and I couldn't quite make out what they were saying. And Chief Romito turned to all of us standing in the corridor and said that 2 is down. I looked at Jim, and I asked him, what do you mean 2 is down? He said in his very colorful language that building 2 just collapsed. And he proceeded to put out a radio call to his officers saying that this is now a mandatory evacuation for all police, fire, and civilian personnel. I was trying to make some sense of what I just heard when Jim physically pushed me into the stairwell, shouting at me to go down. He said he wanted to get the firefighters off the floor. He would be right behind me, and he turned and went back into the corridor. That was the last time I ever saw Chief Jeremy and Captain Kathy Mazza or any of the other officers that were with him. Their remains were later recovered in the World Trade Center wreck. I descended down a blackened, smoke-filled stairwell along with firemen, police, and 2 civilians. And we had no idea of what kind of disaster we were descending into, but our options were limited. The emergency stairwell lighting was knocked out due to the collapse of 2 World Trade Center. However, the firemen's helmets lights illuminated the fluorescent strips on the stairs and handrails that were installed by the Port Authority after the 1993 bombing. At one point during our descent in that darkened stairwell, a New York City detective questioned someone who was walking beside him, someone who was carrying a package that the police thought suspicious. The person would not give his name, did not explain where he worked or why he was in the building. There was a brief struggle. The person was handcuffed and descended with 2 officers. You can imagine that this was a very highly charged emotional environment. Tension was at its peak and no one was taking any chance that the terrorist plot may include a Confederate within the building. For stairwell exited into the lobby of One World Trade Center, and I stood in the center of the lobby looking around at total destruction. Large windows surrounded the lobby along the upper balcony and on the first floor were completely blown out. The walls were caked with thick white plaster. It's like dust, and I turned and looked toward the revolving doors that led into the World Trade Center Mall, where less than 2 hours ago I purchased my coffee. Then it was all over fire. A firefighter grabbed my arm and led me out through a shattered window leading onto West Street, where I looked up and saw what was left of the 2 World Trade Center. Nothing of 2 World Trade Center remained but a mountain of twisted steel and rubble that looked like a broken tooth. A debris field encased in fire, heavy smoke and dust. There was no sun or sky to be seen. It was nearly impossible to see through the dusty, thick air, and breathing was extremely difficult. Everything and everyone was caked in dust and debris. Vehicles were crushed, and there was a momentary strange silence, at least in my mind, except for the very disturbing and unforgettable sound of chirping. A lot of chirping like a field of crickets, coming from the street and the debris of what remained of 2 World Trade Center. I was later told that each firefighter has some sort of an alarm called the Personal Alert Safety System device on their equipment that beeps or chirps when the firefighter has not moved for a certain period of time. At that moment, a firefighter ran up to me and yelled, "Run." And I did run up the West Side Highway. Minutes later, while still running, One World Trade Center collapsed. On that day, I lost 87 of my Port Authority colleagues, 37 of former police officers. Many of those lost I knew well. In the months that followed, I attended a few funerals, but many, many memorial services, simply because the remains of those colleagues killed had not been recovered. My family and I are very much aware that I would not be here today had it not been for the bravery and selfless acts of courage of the men and women in these stories who saved my life. My many family events, graduations, weddings, being an active part of my children's lives, and now my grandchildren's lives, and spending precious time with my wife, Elaine. I owe it all to those first responders who gave their lives on September 11th. It's a tremendous and very personal debt of gratitude that I can never repay. The vast majority of the 20,000 civilian employees who were in the Twin Towers at the moment of the attack were also able to live their lives because of the sacrifices made by our first responders. In closing, my story is one of thousands of personal stories of heroism. No doubt there are also stories of heroism that will never be told simply because no one lived to tell those stories. A personal lesson for me is that at any moment, our lives may be faced with personal risks, perhaps life-threatening risks. In the face of these challenges, I hope I will show courage and compassion, because I have learned that acts of kindness, big or small, could make a tremendous difference in someone's life. One last but important note. The Allendale Mayor and Council and the prior Mayor and Council and its residents are to be committed to creating this wonderful memorial to 9/11, commemorating the lives saved and lives lost on that day 22 years ago. The creation of this memorial proclaims that this is a place for reflection and memories. It keeps the importance and the relevance of September 11, 2001 alive for all of us and for generations who follow us. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my experience with you on September 11, 2001. May God bless each of you and may He keep you safe. Thank you.
At this time, I would like to invite Councilman Joe DeLuizio to come up and present the ceremonial wreath. Thank you, Robin Rossler and the Rosslers, for donating that wreath since the inception of the ceremony. Now I'd like to invite Council President Liz Coleman, with the help of Councilman Matt O'Toole, to come and read the timeline that we were speaking about earlier that is etched in stone around our PCC building.
And thank you, Frank. It makes it all the more emotional and real hearing yours and other people's stories even as I read this timeline. So thank you for sharing with all of us. 7:59 a.m. American Airlines Flight 11 92 people aboard, departs Boston for Los Angeles. 8:14 a.m., American Airlines Flight 175, carrying 65 people, departs Boston for Los Angeles. 8:20 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77, departs Washington, D.C. for Los Angeles, carrying 64 people. 8:41 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93, 44 people aboard, leaves Newark for San Francisco. 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashes into floors 93 through 99 of the World Trade Center's North Tower. 8:47 a.m., emergency medical services mobilizes. 8:50 a.m., President George W. Bush, while visiting an elementary school in Florida, is informed that a plane has hit the World Trade Center. 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 crashes into floors 75 through 85 of the World Trade Center's South Tower. 9:08 a.m., the FAA bans all flight departures to New York City and through the city's airspace. 9:21 a.m., all of the bridges and tunnels in the New York City area are closed. 9:31 a.m., President Bush calls the events in New York City an apparent terrorist act on our country. 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashes into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. 9:42 a.m., for the first time in history, the FAA grounds all flights over or bound for the continental United States. 9:59 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. 10:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93 crashes in Shanksville, PA, missing its Washington, D.C. target. 10:28 a.m., the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. 11 a.m., Mayor Rudolph Giuliani calls for the evacuation of Lower Manhattan. 2:51 p.m., the U.S. Navy dispatches missile destroyers to New York and Washington, D.C. 5:20 p.m., the 47-story building, 7 World Trade Center collapses. 8:30 p.m., President Bush addresses the nation, calling the attacks evil, despicable acts of terror, and declaring that America and its friends and allies would stand together to win the war against terrorism.
Now we'll have a moment of silence. Now everybody please light your candles. Thank you, Joe Hart, for that beautiful rendition of Taps. Now I'd like to call up Troop 59 to please come and raise the flag